Hey, Jonathan.
Hey Tracy, how are
How
you?
you doing? I'm good. How are you doing? How was the first
Oh,
one?
yeah, it was fine. Yeah, um, sort of went quicker than I expected. I thought, oh, I don't have enough to say, but no,
How did it take,
just
what,
stretch
like
it out.
35 or 40 minutes or okay.
Yeah, in the end, I think it went on for 45 minutes, and yeah, we had time for some questions, so that was all okay.
Yeah. Nobody's ever sad if you end early, Jonathan. It's usually if you go over.
No, I can imagine.
So yeah, if you want to, yeah, Emily, it looks like Emily adjusted the poll for you for this
Okay,
session. So, and
fine.
just tell me when you want me to launch those and I'm happy to do that for you.
Yeah, fine, I'll do that. One moment. Okay, what can you see this now?
Yeah, you're not in presentation mode. Yeah.
Not yet, no.
Yeah, I can see.
If I do this, actually, it's the wrong presenter mode, isn't it? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's full screen. Yeah, you want to click a couple and let's just to make sure. Click a slide in just to make sure it's all good. Yep. Yep. Looks good.
All good?
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Yep. Yep. And I'll start letting people in probably in 8 minutes beforehand. Probably I'll start letting them in. So
Okay, that's fine. So now it's 42. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Usually about yeah, you know.
Do you hear anything now? Listen. Do you
No,
hear that? No?
no.
Okay, that's because I've moved to the front of the house where there's a road. There's not many cars, but one or two a minute or so. And
Yeah, there's a bunch of construction going on with where I live. I live right in downtown, so
oh
hopefully
yeah.
nothing. And I live right by a police station, so hopefully the police are
No,
not
that
going to
sounds
tear out in a sirens blazing during this. I'm always like, oh no, please don't let it happen. But
good. Okay, I'm just gonna pop to the toilet and I'm just gonna look at this again before we start. So
yeah, no
I'm here.
worries, no worries. Yeah, take care.
Yeah,
I'm here. I'll go off screen for a little bit. I'm going to refill my cup of coffee. It's morning
sounds a good
here,
idea.
so yeah.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right, all right. See you in a minute. Bye.
just sitting down.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, Emily. Emily's here now too, so she's
Oh.
just not on camera.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, both.
Hey, Emily, I'll start letting people in at about 8 minutes beforehand. Is that 2 or 5 minutes before? What do you think?
Oh, 8 minutes before is fine. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Goes. How was the first session, Jonathan?
Yeah, it was fine. Yeah, I was just saying that it went quicker than I thought in terms of I got through the material quicker. So second half, I slowed down a bit. It's always usually the other way around, so I was a bit surprised.
Hey, I'm noticing we only see the top of your head right now. Can you?
Yeah, don't
lower
worry,
your
I'm
ca-
sitting.
Okay.
No, he has a
stand up.
standing desk. He's sitting for before we
Oh.
start.
It's just like,
No, I saw him earlier. It's fine. But yeah, perfect.
looking forward to it. Well, we're all set. I adjusted that poll. Sorry about that. That second one now is multiple choice, so people can choose more than one option. Well, good to go there.
Yeah, great.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll go on mute now.
So Jonathan, I'm going to start letting people in like a minute or
Okay.
so.
Sure, I'm going to stand up. I get a kind of red glow. Huh?
That's okay. I look completely washed out of 2 years of Zoom calls. I can never, where my desk is, the lighting is never right. So
I think this comes from the screen. I've got it on a big screen. So the
I
red
see. It's the red. Oh yeah, it'll change. You're gonna
goes away when I go there. Yeah.
Yeah, there you
At the
go.
beginning, I look evil, and then later on, more benign.
And so it seems like Sarah's going to watch it again. She was.
Yeah, she's glutton for punishments, I guess.
All right, I'm going to start letting people in. Is that okay? And I'll say hello and all that good stuff. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Yeah, welcome. Hello, everyone. We'll get started in about 6 minutes. It looks like people are coming in from all over. So welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Oh, 10:30. Oh. Everyone, yeah, we'll be starting in about 5 minutes. Someone told me it was 10:30 p.m. their time. It's 8:55 a.m. in my time, so we're traveling many time zones. Nice to see. Everyone, welcome. Yeah. Yeah, everyone, we'll get started in about 3 minutes. So thank you for joining early. Glad everyone's here. Hi, everyone, welcome. Yeah. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Welcome, everyone, welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Yeah, everyone, welcome. We're going to get started in about a minute. Glad to see people from all over. Yeah. Okay, you ready, Jonathan? I'm gonna get started.
We're ready. Yeah.
It's time. Welcome everyone again. Hello everyone. My name is Tracy Bailey, and I work here at National Geographic Learning. And I'm here to start today's webinar, Taking an Interest in Interest, presented by Jonathan Bygrave. Before we get started, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the functionality of the webinar platform. I think many of you know it very well. But first off, at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice that there are several icons. The first button on the left is the chat function, which I see all of you are using pretty comfortably, but be sure to send your messages to everyone to ensure that the whole group can read your message. And as a reminder, please keep the chat focused to the session. On the right, you'll see a Q&A button. Please use this button to ask the presenter or host, myself, questions. We have a dedicated time at the end of the session to go through questions with you. Finally, we'll be sending out a certificate of attendance and a recording of the session within 5 business days after the webinar. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker. Jonathan Bygrave has worked in English language teaching since 1992 as a teacher, editor, publisher, and author. He has written and co-written 18 books across 7 course book series, writing for both adults and teens. In his recent years, he's also been exploring and creating materials for digital publishing. Jonathan has carried out classroom research in various countries, including Brazil, Italy, Japan, Korea, Poland, Russia, and Spain. He was born in the UK and now lives next to a canal in the Netherlands, unfortunately not in a windmill. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Jonathan, and let's get started. Thanks.
Yep, thanks very much, Tracy. My canal is just here outside the window, so it's raining very heavily here. So if you hear the noise of rain, that's what it is. Thank you very much, first of all, to everybody for joining at whatever time it is that you're joining from around the world. I very much appreciate the fact that you've joined to listen to this presentation. I'm going to talk about interest, and by interest I mean the feeling that you have when you find something interesting. Now you may wonder, why is he talking about interest? Why is he not talking about something pedagogical, something useful? I want to argue that interest is useful. Actually, it's very useful. I want to say that it's at the core of education even. It's at the core of what we do as individuals. Interest is what drives us to take action. For example, do you read newspapers, magazines? If you do, it's because you find the content interesting. Do you stay in touch with old friends online or in person? Again, it's because you want to know what's happening in their lives. You're interested. Do you listen to the news or watch soap operas even on television? Again, it's because you're interested in the world, or with a soap opera or a drama, you're interested in what is going to happen to the characters. Do you visit new places, walk down new streets, download new apps, read new books? Do you attend webinars with strange titles like Taking an Interest in Interest? All of this is action driven by the interests that you feel. I want to give you another small example, and I'd like you to use the chat box for this. What I want you to do is look at that picture and give me a one-word answer as to what those round discs are that you see in front of the house. So you could say, for example, decoration, or you could say weapons, whatever you want. So just type in the chat box a one-word answer, and I'll give you a few seconds to do that now. A shield we have, weapons, a kind of stove, drums, shades, protection, a wheel, shelter, hats. Someone needs a big head to wear those, but yeah, good. Musical instruments, currency, energy, mushrooms. I haven't had that, that's a good chance. I'm going to tell you what they are. In one word, they're money. It may seem strange, but they're actually money in the same way that a coin or a piece of paper is money for us. They're stone discs, they're made of stone, and the very biggest of them are 4 meters across. You will find them on a group of islands called Yap in the Pacific. And Yap is about 2,000 kilometers east of the Philippines. And because these stones are money, the more of them you have, the richer you are. So you might wonder, how are these stones used? I mean, if you want to go and buy a loaf of bread from the shop, you can't pick it up and walk down and give it to the shopkeeper. So how are they used? Well, the answer is they're not used for small purchases. They're used for big purchases, things like buying land or buying houses, or the tradition is when your son or daughter gets married, they're used as a gift. So they're a great honor, but they're money in exactly the same way as the money that we use. Now, you may think that's strange. What's stranger is that because they're too big to move, they stay where they are. So the stones that you see here may not belong to the people who live in the house. They may belong to a neighbor or somebody who lives on the other side of the island. And what happens is that everybody knows who they belong to. And because of that, there's no reason to move them. And as Mihaela says here, they're used for marriage, exactly. So the point is, you don't have to have the stone next to you to own it. Because no one's going to come and pick it up and take it away, everybody knows in their mind that you own it. There's nothing written down, but everybody knows on Yap who each stones belong to. What is even stranger is that some of the stones are at the bottom of the sea. The people who quarry these stones, they have to travel to another island called Palau, which is about 400 kilometers west of Yap. And they quarry these stones, they cut them out, and they bring them back on a boat. And sometimes this boat hits a storm on the way back, and they have to tip this stone off the side of the boat in order to survive the storm. But when they get back, they tell everybody about the stone, and it's agreed that the stone exists, and it's agreed who it belongs to, and that person is richer. So you don't even have to have the stone on the island in order to be rich. What is even stranger to me is that this money on Yap is just like our money. How do you know that a person is rich? Well, generally, you look at their bank account and you see if it's a big number or a small number. If it's a big number, you know they're rich. And these numbers in your bank account, you can't eat them. They're not going to keep you warm, but they are proof that a person is rich, in the same way that these stones are proof that a person is rich on the islands of Yap. Now, when I first read about these stones in Yap, it sort of lit a fire for me in my mind. I found it incredibly interesting. It made me think about money in a whole new way. For me, it led to conversations with people about money that I'd never had before. It led me to read books about money and articles about money to try to find out more about it, because I realized that the idea that I had of money was wrong. I started to watch films on YouTube and listen to podcasts about money. I even started to write a story for my children about money because I wanted to somehow put across the idea to them that money is not something that exists without question. It's actually much more complicated than that. And all of these things happened because I was interested in money. Now, I'd love to tell you that that interest was actually, that inspired me to go and buy Bitcoin several years ago, and now I'm very rich. Unfortunately, that's not true. It didn't actually inspire enough action in that sense. However, to get back to the point of interest, I've been writing course books, as Tracy said, for 20 years, and I've always tried to make the material in the course book as interesting as possible. But I haven't stopped to ask why. What's the point? Why should we make material and lessons interesting? So that's the question I want to ask in this talk. Actually, I want to divide it into 4 questions. The first question is, what does the word interesting mean? What do we actually mean when we say that something is interesting? The second question is, what are the different kinds of interest that we experience? What are the different ways of categorizing interest? The third question is, why is it important that learning material and lessons are interesting? And lastly, how can we add interest to learning material and to lessons? So those are the 4 questions I want to answer in this talk. Let's start with question 1. What does the word interesting mean? Now, I have an answer for you. And to illustrate that answer, I want to tell you 3 facts. Okay? I'm going to tell you 3 facts. And after I've told you those facts, we're going to have a poll. And I want you to vote on which fact you found most interesting. Okay? So be honest, huh? Don't say what you think I want the answer to be. Say which fact you really found most interesting. Okay, number 1, here we go. We're talking about lions, by the way. Most people believe that a group of lions are always led by a male lion. After all, that's what we see in films like The Lion King. But in reality, it's the female lions who lead the group. They do almost all the hunting, almost all the fighting, and they also make all the most important decisions, such as where to go and what to do. That's fact 1. Fact 2. Male lions look very different to female lions. They have a mane of hair that grows down and back and covers most of their head, neck, shoulders, and chest. Number 3, white lions are the same as normal lions, apart from the fact that they have a genetic condition called leucism, which results in the loss of color. Leucism is called by a double recessive allele, which is where 2 different genes on one of a pair of chromosomes within the nucleus of a cell masks the effects of 2 other genes on the other chromosome in the pair within the cell nucleus. So what I want you to do now, Tracy, could we bring up the poll for this? What I want you to do now then is think about which fact did you find most interesting, honestly. Choose one and vote. And I'll give you a few seconds to do that, and then we'll have a look at the answers together. When you're ready, Tracy, you can show us the answer. Okay, we have almost half of you thinking number 1 is the most interesting, 25% thinking number 2 is the most interesting, and around a quarter of you again thinking number 3 is the most interesting. Okay, thank you very much for your answers. I'm going to now tell you which one I thought you were going to say. Did I think 1? Did I think 2? Or did I think 3? The answer is I thought number 1. Ha! I'm very relieved that you voted for number 1. At least half of you voted for number one. The question I want to ask then is, why did I think you would vote for number one? Or the majority of you would vote for number one. I see those of you who voted for number three, possibly you're a lot more intelligent, but definitely you're a lot more intelligent than me. And you probably have an interest in genetics and you understand that subject as well. So let me think though, for the average person, why is number one the most interesting? Well, the first reason you'd have to say is because interesting information is new and unexpected. That's one of the characteristics of interesting information. It's something that's new and a little bit unexpected. If you know something, it's not really interesting. So think about fact two. Most of us know that male lions have a big mane of hair. We know that. So when we see that, we don't really find it very interesting. Some people might argue that having a lot of hair is also not particularly interesting, but that's a different subject. Now, what else is it? What else are the characteristics of interesting information? Interesting information is complex but comprehensible. And this is key. It's got to be more than simple. It's got to be a little bit complex, but you have to be able to understand it. And that, I would argue, is what makes number one interesting. For me, when I found out about this, I found it new. I've seen The Lion King. I thought that the male lions were always the boss. Now, it turns out not. It's the female lions who are the boss. And the other fact about number one is that the information was a little bit complex. It talks about who does the hunting, who does the fighting, who makes the decisions. So I found that, for that reason, I thought that people would mostly vote for number one. So to summarize, interesting information is new, unexpected, a little bit complex, but comprehensible. Okay. Let's look at question number 2. What are the different kinds of interest? I'd like to hand this over to you. But before I do that, I want you to just think about, imagine you're at home, you're watching TV, and you're watching a documentary. It's a documentary about something that you're interested in. It might be wildlife, it might be something about the built environment, but imagine you're watching it and you find it very interesting. And that interest, I want you to sort of think about how that feels and just hold on to that feeling for a moment. Now, imagine that somebody tells you a really interesting, juicy piece of gossip about your neighbor or a colleague, and you listen and you think, your eyes get bigger and you think, wow, that's interesting. Now, those two feelings, the documentary and the gossip, are those two feelings of interest the same, or are they different? I would argue that they're different. And the reason is, interest is not just one thing. There are different kinds of interest. So I want to hand over to you first in the chat box. Just type in, what do you think the different kinds of interest are? Type in some of your ideas. Intellectual interests, hobbies, intrinsic interests, emotional interests, personal interests, good. The need to learn, career interests, science, yeah, future, professional interest, yeah. Okay, great. Lots of ideas. I could keep reading them. But I'm going to look at what researchers say about interest, how they define it. Researchers define interest in two different ways. And the first way is where it comes from. So interest can be either situational or individual. Situational interest is interest which is created from outside and comes into you. For example, an interesting lesson. Whereas individual interest refers to the interests that you have inside you and that you have across space and time. So it doesn't matter where you are, you're interested in these things. In the classroom and with learning materials, we can aim to build situational interest because that's what we can bring in. Individual interests are something that students bring with them, and we're unable to impact those, we're unable to affect those. However, situational interest, we can have some control over. Now, there's another way to think about interest too. Researchers also think about interest in terms of how it makes us feel. And they divide the way it makes us feel is divided into two kinds: affect-related interests and value-related interests. Now, this sounds a little bit theoretical, but actually it's very simple. Affect-related interests is interests that refers to how we feel. It defines how we feel. Whereas value-related interests, now let me talk about affect-related interests first. Affect-related interests, think of some of the words you might use to describe that. For example, enthused, excited, inspired, curious, stimulated. All of these words describe affect-related interest. They have this feeling of pleasure and a feeling of activation. They describe a feeling. Now, value-related interests are interests that we have in a topic because it fits our goals. So we think it will be valuable to us. From those two types of interest, what research shows is that lessons which make us feel good and which fit our goals, so lessons in learning material which have affect-related interest and value-related interest, those are the most successful lessons. Those result in the most learning. So let's put this all together. In the classroom, what we're aiming to do is to introduce learning material which is new, a little bit complex, but comprehensible. And that learning material, we hope, will lead to a kind of situational interest in the classroom. Regardless of what the personal interests are of the students, they will feel interested in the material and the lesson that you're bringing. And that interest will consist of two things. It will consist of a feeling of pleasure, and it will consist of a realization that this is important. So the value will be obvious to the student and they will feel the pleasure. That's an ideal scenario. That's your ideal lesson. Now, still, that doesn't answer the question of why do we do this? Why do we try to make lessons as interesting as possible? It's not easy, is it, to do a lesson that has value-related interest and affect-related interest? It's not easy to bring your students along with you. I think possibly you can say it's much easier to do a boring lesson than it is to do an interesting lesson. So I want to ask, what exactly are the benefits of giving your students interesting learning material and an interesting lesson? I'm going to give you another poll, okay? Tracy's going to bring up a poll for you. This time there are 5 benefits that you can get from an interesting lesson or interesting learning material. 5 benefits. You can click on as many as you like, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can click on all of them if you want to. Which ones do you think are true? I'm going to give you a few seconds to click on those in the poll that you'll see on your screen now. So if you think it helps them read faster, click the first one. If you think it helps students become physically stronger, click the second one. If you think it leads to more learning success, the third one. If you think that interesting lessons help your students' breath smell sweeter, you click the fourth one. And if you think it improves their memory, click the last one. And if you think all of them, click all of them. If you think three of them, click three of them. Tracy, have we got the results now? Here we go. Okay, fantastic. 92% of you think it leads to learning success. 28%. How does that work? 92% and 28%. Doesn't add up. Never mind. So the most popular answer is it leads to learning success, followed by it improves their memory, followed by it helps them read faster, followed by it makes them become physically stronger. And the least successful answer is it makes their breath smell sweeter. I'd like to know which people voted for that, because I cannot imagine actually how it would work. But funnily enough, all the other four answers are correct. Interesting learning material helps students to read faster. Believe it or not, it makes them become physically stronger. It leads to learning success, and it also improves their memory. I'm going to explain to you how, because one of those you might not believe me, but it is true. So, firstly, interest leads to engagement. This is the first benefit of giving an interesting lesson. It leads to engagement. And engagement means that you actively do something with the content of the lesson, with the material of the lesson. And this engagement is what turns interest into learning. It's what creates successful learning. Now, why is that? Because basically, the reason is, if you engage with something, you use more sophisticated learning strategies. You take the content, for example, and you apply it to yourself. You take those new words that the teacher introduced in the lesson, and you see if you can apply them to yourself. You engage with those words. You engage with the grammar. And those sophisticated learning strategies, those are the things which lead to learning success. Secondly, interest, the second benefit from an interesting lesson or learning material is that it actually frees up attention and it improves your memory. This is a little bit strange, but I want to tell you about an experiment that was carried out in the 1980s. So in this experiment, they got groups of students, and the students had to read out sentences one by one from a list. After they'd read each sentence, they had to give the sentence a score for how interesting it was. Score between 1 and 10. Now, while they were doing this experiment, reading these sentences and giving a score, the researcher would play a bell, ding. And what the students had to do was to respond as quickly as possible when they heard the bell. What they found, what the researchers found, was that the more interested students were in the sentences, the quicker they responded to the bell. Now, why is that? What's the reason for that? Well, the reason is that the more interested you are in something, the more mental space you have for the world around you, because you don't have to try so hard to concentrate. So because you don't have to focus so much, because the interesting material draws you in, you have more mental energy free. It's paradoxical, but it's true. Being interested in something leaves more of your brain free for the outside world, for other things. So it is less mentally tiring. It's less mentally taxing. There's similar research which shows that the more interested you are in a text, the faster you read it, and the more information you remember. So that's the second benefit of interesting learning material, that it actually frees up students' minds to focus on other things, and it makes things easier to remember. Now, the third thing, this is an even more bizarre experiment researchers carried out. They gave students these grip things, and they asked them to grip these grip things, and they gave them anagrams to do. So anagrams are when you have a word with the letters jumbled up, and the student's job was to keep hold of the grip and to solve the anagrams. And what they actually found was that those people who were interested in the activity and interested in the anagrams, they held this grip together longer. Now, you might ask, is this serious research? It is serious research. Is it kind of important? I don't know. I find it interesting, which is kind of on topic. But the point is that what they also found out was that those students who are interested in anagrams and also who saw a value in learning those words, so that means those who had affect-related interest and value-related interest, those are the ones who kept the grip together the longest. Lastly, the final benefit I want to say about giving interesting lessons and interesting learning material is that learning is not always easy. It's sometimes hard work and you have to keep going. And interest is one of those things that gives you the mental energy to keep going. So I live in the Netherlands now, and I've been here for 5 years. So I'm learning Dutch. I find Dutch a very difficult language to learn. However, my motivation is quite strong because I live here. And that gives me the encouragement to keep going. And I think similar thing is true for your students, that if they feel that what they're studying is interesting, it just gives them that extra push to keep going when learning is hard. Now, you remember the fourth question that we asked, the fourth question and the final question actually was, how do we make lessons interesting? Now, here we come to the part of the talk really where I have to hand over to you because this is your area of expertise. How do you make lessons interesting? Could you type some of your hard-won expertise into the chat box and tell me and the other people who are reading what you do to make lessons interesting? How do you adapt material? How do you bring interest into the lesson? Type your answers into the chat box and let's share some of this experience. Authentic activities, student-centered approach, games, music, trending topics, videos, realia, do a survey, visualizing, that's interesting, yeah, dramatization, social media issues. These are going faster than I can read. If I don't see your answer, apologies, but thank you for typing it in. Songs, short movies, jokes, asking them what they want, writing a mini saga. We have very creative teachers here, I see. Interesting grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, facts, elocution, games, appeal to the emotions, handcrafts for kids, and debate. Fantastic. Including their students' own interests. Now, thank you for sharing these topics again. I could carry on reading for a long time, but what I'm going to do is just give you the perspective more from the material, what we might do to add interest to the books and to the material that we write. Now, the first one, I have to say, how we make it less interesting is not really connected to material, but a little bit. What you have to do is to help students realize that their interests are not fixed. So again, this is another way that researchers define interests, that people's attitude to interest actually, that your attitude can be fixed, as in my interests are the same always, and that's all I'm going to be interested in. Or you can have a more fluid attitude to interests. And that fluid attitude would be, now I can be interested in this, I can be interested in this, and I can be interested in this. So your interests respond to the world around you. And research shows that people with a fluid attitude to interests are more successful learners. Those people who have a more rigid attitude, who think that I'm not going to study this because it's not interesting to me. I'm not interested in this and I'm not interested in this. Those people tend to make less successful learners, but it can help students to make them realize that a fluid approach is going to give them more success. One way you might do this is to ask students what their interests were 5 years ago and see if they're the same today. I know that mine aren't. The second way that we might try to make our material interesting for students is to build knowledge step by step, but with an easy way in. So you have to move at the right pace. I'll give you an example of this. There was some research about abstract art in an art gallery. And what they found was that the abstract art, which had more information, was found to be the most interesting by people at the gallery. So that little piece of text that you read was really important for people to understand what they were seeing, and it resulted in them finding the art more interesting. Now, this has a sort of corollary in books, because to the photos and the images that we include, we can also include a little bit of text to explain what's happening. So for example, here we see a young woman from Malaysia performing football tricks. Or here we see somebody working in an online thrift store, what in British English is called a second-hand store, second-hand shop. Those little bits of text allow students an easy way in to the topic. The chances are that it will help students' interest to increase. By the way, all of these images and things that I show you from now on, these are taken from Reflect, from Listening and Speaking 5, which is one of the ones that I wrote. However, you can use these ideas in all materials. The third way that we would try to bring interest to the material that we're looking at is to find the right balance between complexity and comprehensibility. One of the lessons in the book that I mentioned is about cleanliness. And it was a topic I knew nothing about until I started to research it. And it turns out that it's a surprisingly interesting and detailed topic. So for example, you see on the left-hand side of this graphic here, a kind of greenish metal implement. And this was used by certain people in ancient Rome to clean themselves. And what they did was that they would do exercise so that they sweated, and then they would cover themselves in dust and mud. And that mixed with the sweat to make a kind of mud. And then they used this metal implement to scrape it off. And that was how cleaning, how personal hygiene happened for many people in ancient Rome. By contrast, about 1500 years later in Europe, so that's about 500, about the 14th century, say, people actually stopped bathing. And this carried on for about 500 years. In many parts of Europe, people thought that bathing was dangerous, particularly bathing in warm water. And the reason is that they thought that the warm water would open up the pores of their skin, and that is how disease got in. This is what doctors told them. And doctors were facing epidemics and pandemics, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't have the knowledge, the science, in order to tell people what to do. So they made it up. And what they told people was, don't wash in warm water. So can you imagine the smell in most parts of Europe for, 500 years ago? It must have been terrible. At the same time, in Central America, people were routinely washing in streams and rivers twice a day, and they were using a kind of soap from what was called a soap tree to clean themselves. So you see that the topic is broad and quite detailed, in this activity, students listen to a lecture about this topic of hygiene. And what we decided to do, because it was so sort of complex and wide-ranging, we decided to create this quite attractive graphic. And the first thing students do is listen, and they write the dates on the timeline. Now, this is like creating their own little annotated notes for an image. It's an easy way in. And once you have the easy way in, the chances are that your students will make the next step and hopefully find the topic interesting. So the first thing they do is listen and write the dates in, and then they give a general comprehension answer. What was the listening about? Only after they've done that do they listen again, and then they do a more detailed listening comprehension. Let's move on to another way that we bring interest into learning material. We try to find information which is surprising and memorable. So this lesson, for example, looks at 4 different theories of humor. So there are 4 different theories about why we laugh. Those theories are, the first one is superiority theory. You see them on the left. And superiority theory is the idea that we laugh because we hear a joke about someone doing something stupid, and that makes us feel superior. The second idea is incongruity theory. And incongruity theory, incongruous is obviously when something is out of place. So for example, somebody sitting in a boat in the middle of the desert is incongruous. So that idea is that we laugh at things which are incongruous. The third idea is relief theory, that when somebody tells us a joke, we feel tension. And when they tell us the punchline at the end, that tension is released and we laugh. And the last theory, benign challenge, is that we laugh at things which challenge our norms and values, but in a nice way. So they make fun of how we behave or how society works, but they do it in a way which doesn't offend us. So those 4 theories, I'm just going to ask you, those 4 theories of humor, which one do you think is the most commonly accepted now? Type in your answer in the chat box. Which one do you think? Now tell me, which one do you think is the correct one? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Just type a number in the chat box. 3, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4. 3, 4, 4, 4. Lots of votes for 3 and 4. Nobody 1 or 2 yet? Oh, there's a 2. I saw a 2. 2 and 3, somebody? Nobody believes in number 1. Oh no, someone just believes in number 1. Good. The most common theory at the moment, the one which is generally accepted to be true, is the last one, benign challenge theory. And we look at this in the lesson, in the learning material. We look at why that might be the case, and we look at it in terms of what was voted to be the funniest joke in the world. There was a survey carried out which asked people to tell their funny jokes, and then there was a vote, which one was the funniest. And it was a very wide-ranging survey, something like 80 different countries, people from 80 countries took part, I think tens of thousands of votes. And the vote which won is the joke which won, sorry, is the joke that we look at in the listening of this lesson. I would tell you the joke, but I'm really, really bad at telling jokes, so I'm not going to do it. The point that I'm sort of making here is that material which is memorable and surprising is material which your students are more likely to find interesting. Now, finally, from a materials perspective, what we can do to make a lesson or learning material interesting is to include things which combine those ideas of affect-related interest and value-related interest. So we include activities that are fun, pleasurable, and which align with our goals. Now, one goal which almost everybody has is to stay alive. And this quiz looks at what you should do if you meet a dangerous animal in the wild. Okay, I'll just quickly do this quiz with you. You're going to have to type very quickly your answers. Number one, if you see a crocodile or alligator in the wild, what should you do? A, run away. B, stay still. C, play dead. A few seconds, what's your answer? Correct answer is actually A, you should run away. What about a shark? You're swimming in the sea and you see a shark. What do you do? A, stay where you are. B, swim away calmly. Or C, swim away fast. A wide variety of answers. Now, I'm writing this lesson, I checked this out with experts. The correct answer is B, swim away calmly. What about snakes? You see a snake in the wild. What do you do? Just ignore it? A. Do you B, try to scare it away? Or do you C, walk away slowly? Most people saying C here. C is actually the correct answer. Well done. What about number 4, a cougar? I've never seen a cougar in the wild. I've never seen any of these things in the wild, actually. But if you see one walking through a forest, you see a cougar, do you stay completely still? Do you look away and run away? Or do you look at it in the eye and back away slowly? What's your answer? C, mostly C's, A's, and B's. Yeah, most of you are correct. The answer is C. You should look at it in the eye and back away slowly. And the same is actually true for wolves. I think the worst thing you can do is to run away, because that shows that, yeah, eye contact with a cougar, question mark, as Alexandra says. Good point. It's probably not the easiest thing to do, but no, that's what the experts say. So I offer that to you as an example of aligning affect-related interest and value-related interest. What I want to do now basically is summarize this lecture and then we finish. We can have questions, but that's the idea. What's the time? Oh, okay, let's quickly summarize. We've looked at 4 questions today. What does the word interesting mean? And you remember that we said it's something new and complex, going too fast. Something new and complex but comprehensible. Second question was, what are the different kinds of interest that we can experience? And you could look at that in 2 ways: where the interest comes from, that's situational interest and individual interest, and how it makes you feel, that's affect-related interest and value-related interest. We looked at why it's important that learning material is interesting, and we saw the benefits that you get from that. You get successful learning because students engage with it. It frees up mental energy. It helps students read faster. It helps them keep going when something is hard. And strangely, it also gives them physical strength. Remember that, yeah? And lastly, we looked at how can we add interest to learning material. And we mentioned that you can tell students that their interests are fluid. You can build knowledge step by step, find a balance between complexity and comprehensibility, and present information that's new, surprising, memorable, and includes enjoyment, and importantly, that idea of value, something that's useful. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. I think now I'm going to hand to Tracy. There's going to be some questions if you have any. Is that right, Tracy?
Yes, thanks. Yes, Jonathan, we have some questions. Hold on, let me start. The first one is from Ibrahim. And Ibrahim's asking, how do you keep our interest high at all times? How do we do that? Or how do you keep that going?
Okay, Ibrahim, very good question. And I think we should really ask the experts, which is the people here who teach. Would you all like to give your ideas about how to keep interest high at all times? Could you type your answers, your suggestions into the chat box? How do you keep interest high? A variety of materials and activities. Thank you, Ilse. study different topics from Fernanda. Good interaction with students, vary the activities. I think that's what I was thinking as well. You've got to sort of, you know, you're never going to have all your students in your class interested in all the topics that you present. So I think making sure that the activities are short enough to keep their attention and changing, that was one of the things that I think is generally considered very important. There are lots more ideas coming into the chat box here. Empathy, keeping students participating, show yourself interested in the fact. That's also very interesting. I think you've got to give something from yourself, share something from yourself, if you want students to do the same. Okay.
Sorry.
Should we move on to another
Sorry,
question?
next question. Yeah, we have some more questions. So the next question, this one's a little longer. It's from Andrea, saying at one point you talked about your motivation in learning Dutch, but aren't motivation and interest two different things? Are you interested in Dutch? This is longer. Are you interested in the Dutch language and culture, or do you need it to function better when you live in the Netherlands? And she gives a side note, and I do know that Dutch people generally speak very good English. So what she's saying is, I feel that many of my students learn English only because it's compulsory subject at school and they're not interested in the language for personal reasons. What are your thoughts about the relation between motivation and interest?
Yeah, very interesting question, Andrea. First of all, I want to say you're right that in Holland, everyone speaks almost perfect English. It's the best English-speaking country, second language English-speaking country in the world. Something like 85% of people speak relatively good English. And that's very difficult when you want to learn Dutch, because every time you start to talk to someone, they hear that you're English, and then they respond to you in English. So you have to really fight for your right to speak Dutch here. However, that's a little bit of an aside. And you're talking about what's the relationship between motivation and interest. It's a very good question. I would argue that interest is one of the first steps in motivation. I think they're different, as you said, and what we're asking students to do is to find motivation through interest, because it's one of the levers that we have available to us. And you mentioned that your students are often, you probably feel, I think you said that they're not motivated because they're doing English because they have to. I'm sure everyone can relate to that. And I have no magic answers at all. But all I would say is that interesting material, finding the right interesting material for your students is one of the steps, one of the things you can do. But like I say, I mean, what research shows is that the most important thing in learning is the teacher. It's not the book, it's not the topic, it's the teacher. And I think that relationship that you build is probably the most crucial thing. Another question, how have we run out of time?
Yeah, we have a couple more minutes. I can take a couple more. So another question is, how can we make grammar interesting? That's a question.
Yeah. Good
I
question.
think grammar is interesting, but
Yeah. Simona's question, how can we make grammar interesting? Let's go back to the experts again. How do you make grammar interesting? Could you type your answers into the chat box? Define grammar, Nancy says. Grammar in context. Okay, from Imat, thank you. Games, grammar games. I saw someone saying they don't focus too much. Someone saying they hide it, sneaky, yeah. Make it functional, interactive, charts, realistic examples, guided discovery, using games. Make it real life. Do not teach it as grammar. That's an interesting point from Andrea here. I wonder how you do that. How do you not teach it as grammar? Because, yeah, when you say to your students, we're going to do a grammar lesson, do their faces light up, or do they see a little bit, maybe sometimes you need to hide it a bit. It's, to be honest, a big topic and not one that we can cover here in any kind of depth, but there are some very nice ideas coming up in the chat box, which say things much better than I ever will. I always found, I'm not a huge fan of teaching grammar personally, but it's very necessary. It's at the center of the exams and everything that the students feel they should learn. So we have to do it. Certainly, taking the kind of oblique way in, where you start with the topic, you put the grammar in context. That's very much at the core of what we were trying to do. It's what most books are trying to do. It's at the core of what we're trying to do and reflects. But there's also the idea of kind of the grammar for communication, not just for learning the rules. The rules are kept relatively simple. The communication is what's important.
Okay, do you want to take one more question, Jonathan? Do you want to do one more?
Okay, let me see if I can answer anything.
We have a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get through them all. Sorry about that.
Each and every learner class at a time without breaking. This last question from Jayanta, how to focus on each and every learner in a class at a time without breaking my interest and that of my students? Yeah, very good question. I remember seeing a sort of a video of this teacher who had studied this topic. And what he did was that he never turned to the whiteboard. He had everything on a sort of pad in front of him. And he'd worked out that what you have to keep doing is moving around the room, making sure that you're making eye contact as often as possible, while sort of keeping a feel for the room, a feel for the, you've got to read the room, And you watched him in progress. He was always moving and he was always looking at the students, never at the whiteboard, never doing this, because as soon as I turn my back, you kind of lose interest. Huh? It's time to wander off. Yeah. Difficult question to answer in any more detail. Perhaps there will be some answers in the chat box. But I think for now, probably that's all we can say.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll let things coming in for the chat, but I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm very interested in interest now, so thank you very much for a great session. And thank you again for everyone who joined today. So before you leave, I have a couple of things to mention. First, sorry, hold on one sec. I'm sorry, guys. I want to send this to you. I'm sorry. Immediately after the session, you will be directed to a feedback survey to let us know what you thought. So please take the time to do that survey. And if you're interested, what Jonathan showed from you today is from our new academic listening, speaking, and reading, writing series, Reflect. I've put the URL if you want to learn more about the program there. Please visit the website or contact your local National Geographic Learning representative. Be sure to join our online community for teachers of English on our social media channels, where we offer updates on events, practical teaching tips, exciting real world content, and of course, new product information. So with that said, everyone be well, have a good morning, afternoon, evening, and thank you. And again, thank you, Jonathan.
Yep, thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to join. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. We'll let everyone say goodbye for a minute. Then I'll end. Yeah. Again, thanks, Jonathan, so much.
Thank you. Yep.
Too many platitudes, I know. All right, everyone. Bye.